All right, well, thank you again, everybody. It's really appreciate folks from around the world joining us. I know we have a lot of our wonderful clients that have dialed in, and a lot of folks from different time zones. So we're really thrilled to have you with us. And what we're going to do in the next hour is walk through the findings of our 2012 checkup on kind of how the Fortune Global 100 are using social and digital today. And a lot of people ask, why benchmark the 100? What does that tell us? From large, medium, or small companies, B2B, B2C, whatever it might be. And really what our experience has been in the last 2 years is that the Global Fortune 100 are in many cases a good indicator of the wave that's going to be following in the social and digital space. For lack of a better way to put it, once they've adopted, we start to see all of the other barriers fall down. They're not usually the first, they're not the leading edge, but they are, in many cases, the crest of the wave. So when we start to see large adoption of platforms like Google Plus and Pinterest, that we'll talk about today, it's a good sign that we're going to start seeing that really trickle down throughout the marketplace, much as we saw a year ago with Twitter, which was the explosive platform for the Global Fortune 100 last year. We've seen how Twitter's phenomenal growth has really grown and become really an integral tool for all of us in both the PR, communications, and marketing space today. With that, I'm going to walk through kind of our methodology just to open up this morning, and then get into some stats on how the actual Global Fortune 100 are using social. And then we're going to go to our regional market leaders for digital from around the world to give direct insights into how social is being used in LATAM and Asia and Europe and the United States. And then we'd love to take your questions. So with that, let me go to the first slide here. Our methodology was pretty simple, as I noticed. We took a look at the 5 key platforms that we're seeing today. We added Google Plus and Pinterest. We did not, from a global perspective, go into things such as Orkut or VK in Russia or Weibo in China. But our regional folks will be happy to talk about some of those things that we're seeing. We really benchmarked the global 5 that we're now seeing. I think it's, the news here today for us is that we see Pinterest really elbowing its way into that Global 5 platform. We'll talk a little about Pinterest in a second. So just kind of a level set from where we started 2 years ago. The Global Fortune 100 were just starting to use social. It was still a broadcast platform. They were putting out materials. Mainly what we saw was repurposed press releases, and in some cases it wasn't even repurposed. It was just a press release that was put out and posted to a website. 2011, last year, was really the year we started to see engagement start to creep in many of these companies, really starting to understand that you couldn't just broadcast, that you actually had to build a community and provide information that was relevant to them in their lives. What we found in 2012 this year is that I need to go a lot deeper. We were really thrilled to partner with Visible Technologies. Visible, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, is frankly, in my opinion, one of the leaders in social media monitoring and analytics. They're a phenomenal company for the data they're able to provide. They have some very cool proprietary information they can share where you can benchmark a company against another company or a brand against another brand and get a sense for who's owning the conversation or where opportunities are for conversation. So as we say, a monitoring service that just tells you had a million mentions about your brand is basically useless today. It's the insight they give you. What are people saying? Who are those people? And what is it that they want to hear from you? And that's a real key thing that we added to the study this year, and we're real thrilled that Visible partnered with us on this process. So really, we have a couple key insights we're going to roll through here, and I think that the first one is really the no-brainer, and that is that people are talking about the Fortune Global 100 an awful lot. How much? There are about 10 million mentions online each month of the Global Fortune 100. This is, one of those large gee whiz numbers, and it's one that really, I'm sure to all of our clients on the line, they understand it doesn't really matter a whole lot to them personally, but what that tells us is that there is an overwhelming amount of interest from the online, the social marketplace to talk about our brands. This is one of those things where we say, in the social space, you either have one of 2 challenges. The first is to get people to talk and care about you, which is an awful lot harder than the second, which is to engage them when they're already talking about you. So the good news is for our Global Fortune 100, people are aggressively talking about them every single day. And it's just a matter of us reaching out and finding effective ways to engage and communicate with them. So really, kind of what we saw here is a continuation from the trend last year, and that is that Twitter really is driving the global conversation online. The average Fortune 100 company had about 50,000 mentions a month on Twitter. Obviously, some were significantly higher, some were a little bit lower. You start to see some, interesting kind of things pop when you look at forums, blog post forums, and Facebook. But really, again, for us, the overwhelming driver of conversation is Twitter. And I think as you'll see, companies are beginning to realize that and embrace that with how many different channels they've created and the way that they're engaging and responding. The 10 most social companies that have been discussed online, and this does not necessarily mean they were good comments or bad comments. This was just kind of a basic who is getting the most chatter about their brand online. You see kind of a good swath there. I know we have at least 3 of these companies on the line today, so thank you for joining us. But there's significant interest, and what's interesting, if you look at this, it runs the gamut. From tech companies to automotive to oil and gas to a large retailer. So this really is the message here is it doesn't matter if you're selling cars or if you're a tech innovator. People are interested in talking about you online today. I think one of the big takeaways for us that we've developed and kind of seen in the last year is that the days are gone when you could ask for a monitoring report and sit down with your either coffee in the morning or your glass of wine at night if you're kind of a nerd like me and read all the tweets about your brand. That would take your entire life to do that. Really, it's now about how do you sort out the key drivers of the conversation and figure out where you need to focus your very limited resources to engage those people that have a real chance to amplify conversation and to become, to make that shift from really a brand ambassador to a brand apostle. And I think that's something we'll talk a little about today. The difference of someone who raises their hand and says they like you from someone who actually will raise their hand and go get their 10 friends and get them to like you and engage with your brand. And that's really the key challenge, I think, that we're going to see in the rest of 2012 and 2013 is how we make that migration from brand ambassador to brand apostle. So a couple quick stats just to level set for those that are on today before we delve into kind of the real deep stats from the study. Twitter, obviously, explosive amount of growth, 700% growth since our first study, about 340 million tweets a day, or about more than 1 billion tweets every 3 days. I think it was about 4 months ago, it was 1 billion tweets every week. And that number is just kind of continuing to shrink. An interesting anecdote for all of our colleagues on the line today that's one of my favorites about why I think Twitter is so important. It's less the number of tweets and it's more who's tweeting for us as communicators. A survey came out this year of about 450 global journalists. They looked at 27 different countries, and they asked these reporters, what is the #1 source that you go to for sourcing stories? So you're assigned a story, you need to get a source for it. Twitter was the #1 source. More than half go to Twitter first, which tells us as communicators that long gone are the days where we would see a story pitched, and we would then call the reporter and try to pitch our angle to be part of the story. What's happening today is reporters are getting their assignment, and they're going on Twitter, and they're looking to see who has already been talking about this, who has already built a cadre of thought leadership around this particular topic, whether it's a pharmaceutical issue or a banking issue. So if we want to be part of that story arc, we need to be talking about it now and really planting a flag, because that's where reporters go. The interesting second note that they said in that study is the #1 source they go to confirm their source. So they've sourced their story, they have their data, is also Twitter. A little scary, but I guess that's just the reality that we're operating in today. So as we think about kind of aggressive PR and pitching and media relations, Twitter really is becoming a powerful tool for us. Nearly 1 in every 7 people on the planet is an active Facebook user. If you look at where Facebook grew, I remember we were all saying, my goodness, it's 500 million people 2 years ago. This number is now out of date. I saw a number that said they are either past or at 1 billion people. They're very close to that number. So obviously, aggressive amount of engagement on Twitter, on Facebook. I think everyone loves to talk about what's coming next. But I kind of think, for whatever it may be worth, that we've passed the tipping point. If you're a company or brand today scratching your head and asking, should we be on Facebook, that's kind of like asking, should we have a phone? And I think that's something that we'll talk about as we go into the Facebook engagement that we're seeing from brands. Awful lot of video content out there, 72 hours of video still uploaded every minute, about 4 billion views every day. I think that in many cases, and I hope we have a chance in the Q&A session to talk about this, video has become kind of the ugly stepchild of social and digital. We've in many cases forgotten about it. And it's still one of the most powerful tools that we have today Literally every single media outlet today that has an online presence, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, which has to create 12 hours of unique video content every single day for their website, on down to your local news outlet, are hungry for great video. So if we're thinking about integrating video into everything that we do in real time so that it's part of the kind of the news cycle they're operating in, we've got a great chance to actually have our message taken verbatim and carried and put into these sites. And for no other reason than the bottom line. If we create a great video that a Wall Street Journal can slap on their website and put a 15-second B-roll ad over, it's a win-win for both of us. So that's something we ought to be thinking about when we're creating content and driving communications programs. So our second insight here is the growth and the volume of the conversation has really encouraged companies to participate. There's some conversation about whether or not they were encouraged to participate or forced to participate. And I really think they were encouraged to participate. I think when they saw 50,000 tweets a month about people talking about their brand, in many cases expressing passion for how they're engaging with it, that really is the holy grail of communications for us. So we really began to see companies start to want to participate. So as you see the growth, and this will probably be the last year we kind of show this stat, because we've reached the tipping point here, I think, of companies using at least one social platform. We have 87%, so basically 9 out of 10 companies are using at least one social media platform. We won't call out the few that aren't using it yet, but I think it's this is really telling for us that the companies are really engaging and moving forward in their just embracing a baseline social and digital. Twitter is still the most popular among global companies today for the platforms that they use. 82% today have at least one Twitter account. Interesting for us, a quarter of companies have a Pinterest account. So if you just think about where Pinterest was 6 months ago, i.e. barely registering on the radar screen, actually it would be 11 months ago today, and where they are today with a quarter of global Fortune 100s figuring out they need to have a presence on Pinterest. It just kind of shows that the nimbleness with which they're operating. The amount of time it took us to get a quarter of companies on Facebook or on Twitter or on G+ was quite a bit longer. So as we move across here, we begin to see kind of Twitter is still leading, but Facebook and YouTube are very strong, and half companies are on Plus. So just give some detail into not only why companies are engaging, but who's following them and how those numbers are increasing. The average number of followers for a corporate Twitter account has tripled in the last year, which is great, and that does not happen by accident. We often say that social is not Kevin Costner's Field of Dreams. If you build it, people aren't going to come to it. You have to build it and provide a reason for people to follow, and what we're seeing here by these numbers is that a lot of these brands have really figured that out and are providing great content for people to want to follow and engage with them. Same for Facebook, or Twitter rather, so we're still on Twitter, excuse me. The average number of Twitter accounts that each corporate person has is, the increase has been followed by 182% as we move along there. And nearly 3/4 of the companies, as we noted, have a Facebook page. But take a look at how that's grown just over the last year, where a year ago Facebook was really already well past the tipping point globally in its usage numbers, but the Fortune 100 still really hadn't jumped on. And this has been a significant increase, we think, in how they're thinking about using Facebook. And we'll talk in a minute about how many Facebook pages they have and how they've really understood that you have to be geo and language specific when you engage these communities, specifically on Facebook. But it's kind of a trend that we'll see across the network. The average corporate Facebook page has increased by about 275, almost 300% in followers for the Fortune 100, so this is great. I think as of this morning, Coca-Cola is still the largest Facebook fan page in the world, with some 20+ million. Someone on this line will correct me before I finish. I'm sure that the number has increased or someone's overtaken them. But this is just a great sign of how average people are raising their hand, or in this case their thumb, and saying they want to follow, they want to be more engaged, they want information, they want to be part of the community on Facebook. YouTube channel was really a big increase this year for a lot of companies, and I think largely because it is pure and simple broadcasting for them. This was an easy adoption for them to make. I think the hurdle we saw last year was this confusion about, or confusion is probably the wrong word, barrier that the content still had to be HD, commercial quality, at the Fortune 100 level, and they've really understood and embraced in the last year that really what people want is content that's relevant to them, and in many cases, user-generated content or stuff that doesn't look like it's produced on Madison Avenue can be far more engaging. And that's knocked down quite a few barriers to both setting up a shingle on YouTube, but also creating some content. Each corporate YouTube channel has about 2 million views, which is fantastic if you think about just kind of the free eyeballs you're getting. If you were to equate that into advertising dollars, what that would cost to have you buy and have someone sit there and watch your video. I think we saw something, we're seeing now some new data has come out about the average number of video that the average person watches every day, and the recall rate for video ads versus banner ads is exponentially higher. So when we have embedded messages, but also just great visuals, people are recalling at a much greater level. So our third insight, I'm moving through these kind of quickly because I want to get to our regional folks who really are the most interesting people on this call. But this, as consumers and our targets have begun to engage more, corporations have become more engaged. So we are now seeing more conversation back. 79% of corporate accounts that are on Twitter are retweeting and throwing out the @mentions. And what that tells us is, in many cases, especially at the Fortune 100 level, this is no longer being monitored by what we, I think, affectionately called in 2010 the Twintern, the Twitter intern who was handed the keys to the Twitter account for the company. Companies now realize it's not just about being a voyeur on Twitter, but it's about engaging, retweeting folks, and calling people out specifically. Let me see if I can. Facebook as well, we see an awful lot of conversations happening. Each corporate Facebook page averages about 6,000 people talking about it, and about 70% of those pages are responding. We still see a really significant gap in a couple key things. Usage policies on Facebook, so companies who have posted clearly what is and what is not allowed. This is particularly critical for folks in the B2B space, particularly those in the pharmaceutical or banking space. I think there still is a barrier to opening up the wall to conversations for fear that we can't, we'll have an overflow of negative commentary. You start to see a lot of smart companies become very clear and set very clear rules for engagement for what is and what is not allowed on their Facebook page, and then policing it. I think that's really key. So I would encourage the folks who are on the line to go take a look at your Facebook pages for your company and make sure that you've got clear community guidelines for what's allowed and what's not allowed. And then also make sure that you're actually having people engage and comment. The worst thing you can have happen is have someone post a great conversation thread and want engagement and have it go silent for weeks on end. So that's a real opportunity to engage and really pull people in closer. This is, I think, one of the key things that we saw begin to emerge last year, and we've really seen it begin to coalesce. Companies are creating multiple accounts to target audiences by any number of items, geography, topic, or service. This is being done well, and it's being done not so well by some folks. In some cases, it's a very coordinated campaign. I know we have Accenture, I think Accenture may be on the line. Accenture is fantastic at thinking about how they do recruiting via multiple accounts on Facebook. They understand that the way that you're going to recruit somebody in Brazil is not with an account on Facebook in English that might be translated into Portuguese. So there really is kind of a very smart approach to how they look at their number of Facebook pages. They're run by each geo in those areas from a recruiting standpoint. You have other folks out there who just kind of let it happen organically, where you have offices all over the world that has put up a shingle on Facebook or Twitter, and they're not really in an integrated fashion. You start to have significant brand dilution. The net here is, though, that we need to be really smart about how we think about geo and language specifics in each region. And we'll have our regional folks talk about this in a second. But if you just take a look at the companies, the average number of accounts, Twitter, average Fortune 100 has 10 accounts, Facebook 10. And again, for Facebook, a lot of that is recruiting. What we're seeing, a lot of that's recruiting. YouTube is 8, and then you get into Google Plus and Pinterest. What's interesting about Twitter, and I think this is a key takeaway for us, is when we create Twitter accounts, we really need to be thinking about what type of conversation we want to have with what type of individuals. Let me give you an example. I think airlines and hotels do this particularly well. Most people who have a complaint are going to look for that complaints place, the complaint Twitter account, the account specifically set up to engage and have a conversation from a customer service standpoint. You do not want to have all those conversations on your brand account page where you're having specials, promotions, you're highlighting all the great things that your company or organization are doing. So you see a lot of companies today that are in the consumer space set up a specific channel and really staff it like they would have 25 years ago if it was a phone bank, with a dedicated Twitter team, Twitter support team that can take those conversations, those concerns, answer them, move them offline, and solve their problem. And what you start seeing overwhelmingly in many cases is a customer complaint on Twitter handled appropriately can become a very powerful signal that the company engages, listens, and fixes problems. Because you start to see people who've complained go back and say, wow, you know, Marriott or Delta or whoever it might be really listened to my concern and fixed it. I'm a big fan of what I think is Marriott's. I don't know this is their policy, but it's been my experience, is that they try to fix your experience before you leave the property on Twitter in many cases. So if you send out a tweet that you've had an inappropriate experience, they have a team that's fairly rapid in the response, and they want to have that problem solved for you in near real time. And that's kind of, I think, what we're seeing companies embrace here from a customer service standpoint, is it's one of the best insights and customer touch points they've ever had. You know, Ford uses multiple Twitter accounts to highlight different products and services. If you're a Mustang enthusiast, you probably aren't too, you know, interested in what the F-150 is up to. But I think that this is another smart way to be thinking about engaging people who are perhaps loyal to an individual product and maybe not the entire brand, but also people who might be interested in design innovation or what's coming next for manufacturing in America. Wells Fargo is another great example, I think, of a company that uses the Twitter appropriately. They have a kind of an account that's really set up for media. It's where you go for general company news and information. Again, you have that specific customer service channel that says, and you know, Wells Fargo's in a unique position here. Or not unique, it's in an interesting position. There's very little they can talk to you about publicly about your account or your information on Twitter, obviously for security purposes. But they understand they still have to have a listening post there to capture those concerns and then take them offline in a secure environment to address and help their customers move forward. And obviously also as well, career opportunities is a big one on Twitter. Multiple Facebook pages we're seeing. Again, as I mentioned earlier, in many cases this is being driven by many of the same things we're seeing on Twitter, but that number is more than doubled in the last year for the average number of company Facebook pages. I think that we're seeing a little, you know, the trend that I'm seeing at least, stepping outside the Fortune 100 and just looking kind of globally at the companies that we deal with and that we work with, is that this is a little less coordinated than perhaps the Twitter accounts are. That you've got some that are geo-based, some that are issue-based, some that are legacy-based that the company has forgotten that still exist. Some were started by employees. So this is a little bit more tricky, but we're seeing a lot of organizations get a little smarter about how they kind of reel some of these back in and combine them and really bring kind of a focused program for each of them on Facebook. Average number of channels per company on YouTube has increased quite a bit. This is a really interesting development, you know, nearly tripled in the last year. And what you're starting to see is that same mindset we saw on Twitter. So you now have some channels that are specifically dedicated to the commercials that they air. Some are really popular. Some are really HR focused. They show you what life is like at the company, and you can follow a certain individual and really engage from a recruiting standpoint. And others are really kind of, you know, just the corporate kind of video posting. We still see a lot of organizations that use YouTube in many cases almost like an internal video channel. Where they'll post videos and direct their employees to it, which is great, but you know, it's kind of a bit of a missed opportunity if those videos are leading your main corporate page, and that's what the average consumer is coming to see. So, you know, companies really are creating original content. This is the exciting thing for us, is that we've moved from broadcasting, where we're just repurposing old content and pasting it like a corkboard on the internet, and really moving towards where we're thinking about how do we create engaging content in 140 characters or less that actually will provide value? How do we create content for timeline that will actually pull people in and get them excited? So, you know, we're seeing 93% of Facebook pages are updated at least weekly. Many are updated daily, and are, you know, several are more than once a day. If you think about the earlier slide about how many channels people have, this is where the mission creep, for lack of a better term, can settle in if an organization does not have a really clear policy and a plan for how they use social media. If you have 10 Facebook pages, 10 Twitter accounts, 8 YouTube pages, 2 Pinterest accounts, and a Google Plus account, and you just try to update each of those once a week, you're talking about 40 pieces of content you have to post each week. And we've seen a recent study specifically in the B2B space and the consulting space specifically that says the sweet spot is 3 updates a week. That's how you start to begin to convert eyeballs into leads, into potential clients, or consumers into apostles. It's 3 updates that are relevant to them a week. So it's not just 3 corporate posts on your Twitter account. It's 3 posts for people who've raised their hand and said they like the Mustang, who want to have a conversation about sports cars, racing, whatever it might be. That's kind of our sweet spot. So it really begins to help you understand the need to kind of reel those in and have a real clear plan for each as you move forward. Again, timeline, I think this has really been kind of I'm anticipating some questions on timeline, so I'll wait for this to the end. But timeline really has become, for those who are using it effectively, a great tool. We did see some data that came out this past week that said timeline has actually dropped engagement on Facebook overall for Facebook. And I think that's largely because there's still some confusion on how to use it effectively, but also I think it may be just overall fatigue for Facebook changes. But that was a data point that came out last week, which I think is an interesting thing for all of us on the line to be thinking about. How do we effectively use timeline to pull people in? So I think, again, a couple other great examples. I think Procter & Gamble's YouTube page is great in how it ties into its advertising campaign. It really lets you, I think one of the things that we all saw from the Old Spice is the real value of making sure that all of your channels are marching in the same direction for specific campaigns. A lot of people seem to have forgotten, I think, that what made Old Spice so successful, obviously, yes, the social media component, but the 7-figure advertising budget that was on television that launched and integrated with it was also a key component. So this is really a great takeaway for all of us that, if we're doing an aggressive television campaign or print campaign, making sure that all of our channels are kind of integrated to amplify that is a key opportunity for us. Because really what we're seeing today is we want to drive that television experience to that second screen they have in their lap. One of the interesting statistics we've seen from Apple is that the highest iPad usage is between 7 and 10 p.m. Or primetime television. So people are sitting down with their second screen in front of them doing something else, and our goal, I think, today from an advertising standpoint is to create an ad that gets them to want to go deeper and have a deeper experience that's relevant, not just direct them to our web page. So good insight and great work from Procter & Gamble there. Our last insight, and then we'll go to some of our regional data here. As their preferences on social has kind of grown, companies are really adapting, I think, effectively to new platforms. This is not something we saw before. We saw a real hesitation to even begin with Facebook, and then another kind of head-scratching around Twitter. But I think what we've seen companies now do is they've really gotten smart about avoiding shiny object syndrome, where they feel like they have to be on everything, whatever it might be, and they're really thinking about what makes the most sense. And it's really been fascinating to watch Pinterest's growth because I think 3 years ago, Pinterest would have been eschewed and there would have been no adoption for it internally in the boardroom. We would have had questions about why. Instead, now they're looking at the data and the analytics and saying, I understand why this is a powerful platform and we need to have a strategy for engaging. So, 48% of global companies have Google Plus accounts. I think the verdict is still probably largely out on Google+. I think we've seen a number of studies that say, once you reach a certain threshold of friends on Facebook, you're probably not likely to rebuild your social network. But I think, Google has a lot going for it that has made this a smart place for brands to play, and they've been very aggressive in helping brands be smart on Google+. I think next year we'll have some interesting data points on, the verdict on how they've succeeded. I don't think, and I think we would all agree that it's not a battle between Google Plus and Facebook. I think that is probably a last year's storyline that's now passed. Sony's very aggressive and very smart on Google Plus. They know their audience is there. They've got a core audience they're engaging there. If you remember who kind of exploded the first 10 million users on Google Plus, it was the early adopters, the tech elites, the social elites, and they're largely, in many cases, still active on it. So if that's a key audience for you, they're the ones who started the wave building on Google Plus, and they're still there in many cases. Pinterest. Pinterest is a fascinating place for us today as we think about how companies are using Pinterest. The most recent numbers that we've seen show 12 million users of Pinterest. Overwhelmingly, this is the woman's social network. I've seen a number of different data points. One, I think it was from ComScore that said 90% of Pinterest users are women. There was a study that came out that said 97% of Pinterest's fans on Facebook were women. So if you've got a campaign that's visual, that's powerful, that wants to draw in a very key buying demographic, Pinterest is the place for you. Last month we saw numbers that said Pinterest surpassed Twitter in referral traffic. So they've got less than 10% of the overall audience, actually have about 6% I think of the overall audience of Twitter, yet they're driving more referral traffic to websites than Twitter. And that's mainly because if you're not familiar with Pinterest, basically what you're doing is you're looking at a great picture that has a hyperlink back to the website. So if you want more information about it, you click on it and you're driven to Amazon, whatever it might be, to go deeper with the brand. So I really can't think of a company that wouldn't want to be on Pinterest at this point if their audience is in that 20 to 35-year-old female demographic in the United States. Whether you're B2B, B2C, pharmaceutical company, if you're trying to reach moms or single women that might be in the workforce, thinking about kind of how you visualize your story for Pinterest is going to be a key effort for, I think, everyone in 2012 and 2013. So again, here's another example of how some companies are really effectively using Pinterest. Walmart, again, the Walmarts, the Fords, the Home Depots and the Lowe's that have kind of a very visual product they're trying to pull you in on. This is a great place. But I'll tell you, if you're a consumer packaged goods company or anything in the recipe space, design space, clothing, this is really becoming a very powerful platform to be used. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our colleagues to go through some regional insights. And then we'll come back for questions. Thank you very much for your time. I think up first is Stili.
Thank you, Dallas. The global study looked at the 100 biggest companies in a global level, but we have just 3 companies from Latin America in that list. One from Brazil, one from Mexico, and another from Venezuela. That's why we conducted a different study focused in Latin America to get a better sample of companies using social media in our region. The study was conducted in 8 countries with more than 200 companies and will be launched in August, but here you have some information in first hand. The first insight is that the usage of social media in all social platforms in Latin America increased from 2010 for 2012, but we are still below the average, the global average. The most important gap is on YouTube, where you have 79% of companies using YouTube in a global level, but just 31% in Latin America. Twitter is the most used social media platform by companies in Latin America, followed by Facebook. We have also a great number of companies using all social media platforms in Latin America. And a good example is Movistar Telefónica, using Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, blogs, and other platforms like Google Plus and Pinterest. The second insight is that we have more Latin America companies using at least one social media platform than ever before. We have just 49% of companies in 2010, and now we have 65%. Some markets, especially Brazil, with 88% of companies using at least one social media platform, it's above the global average. We have a strong usage of corporate social media also in Venezuela, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. Now I will turn over to our strategist in Europe, Middle East and Africa, Matthias Lufkin.
Well, the biggest challenge in Europe and the Middle East and Africa, of course, are the many different languages. Here, Vodafone is a quite good example how they mastered on Facebook. Basically, the telecom operator has created specific country pages for all its key markets: UK, Germany, Italy, Spain, Greece, Egypt, Qatar, Ghana, and even small Malta. The biggest challenge when you open up all these different accounts is how to keep the same branding on each page, but having a different cover picture to address the market. So that many companies are facing that challenge. And how to create synergies, if you want to cross-post company news across all these platforms. And what is interesting, we see very few companies actually using the Facebook geo-targeting mechanism, where you can basically, on one page, send different language messages, but just using one page. On Twitter, of course, we have a similar challenge. Vodafone here, once again, has set up different accounts, language accounts, across all its markets. Total, the French oil company, has adopted a different approach, tweeting in French and in English on its main account. So this is a French-English account. Personally, I don't think this is the best solution, because if you want to follow Total, you want to have one language. So I think it is key that it's only one language. And of course, Volkswagen is another company who has really targeted each market with specific language accounts. Other companies we see as Siemens, who have more opted for, like Ford, and Dallas pointed it out, more to product-specific Twitter accounts. So with that, I give over to Zahir Nuruddin about an update in Asia Pacific.
Thanks, Matthias. So, good evening, everybody, from Singapore. It's morning in Europe. It's early afternoon in Europe, and probably the morning in North America, where most of you all are. It's a lovely evening in Singapore. And I want to talk a little about what's been going on in Asia. We've seen a dynamic growth in social media adoption among the global 100 companies represented in Asia, of which we have 23 this year on the list. And just 2 years ago, as recent as 2 years ago, Asia was behind. There were 40% of companies were represented in terms of social media engagement, defined as having at least one social media channel to engage consumers with. That number has dramatically increased, and Asia has caught up with the rest of the world. So today, the numbers are on par with what we are seeing globally and in North America. So in the space of a little over 12 months, we've seen dramatic growth, a doubling of social media adoption, absolutely staggering and fascinating. But just like Europe, it's an incredibly diverse region, needless to say, in terms of languages. So we see a diverse adoption in terms of how companies are using social media. Among the big social media channels, we see varied usage. For example, in South Korea, we see that companies are adopting microblogs just as they are adopting social networks and video sharing. Interestingly, also in South Korea, companies are big in terms of corporate blogging, really adopting corporate blogging. 90% of companies that we surveyed last year had already adopted corporate blogging. Not so in markets like Singapore and Taiwan, for example. So the big insight here for me is that companies are really looking at consumer insights in their local markets, and based on these insights, they are deciding which channels to be represented in and engaged in. And similarly with languages, I think companies are finding their way in terms of how to create content in various languages, because as we know in Asia, there's so many languages. What are the big insights we're seeing in Asia? I think this mirrors what Dallas mentioned, are the big insights roughly in the rest of the world, but no more so in Asia than anywhere else is it true that the mobile web has completely exploded. The mobile web is the adoption of the mobile web is the most in Asia of any region in the world. So naturally, companies are really taking to the mobile web. Mobile application creation is on a rise in Asia among the top 100 companies. And we also see video uptake, video adoption, just like in the rest of the world, happening to a great extent in Asia. Companies are using video sharing channels, local video sharing channels, as well as the big ones like YouTube. And interestingly, it's not just video sharing, but the creation of infographics and what we call visual storytelling, which is really on the up and up in Asia. So that's really fascinating in terms of how companies are creating content. The third big insight that we are seeing in Asia is that companies are moving past just having branded social media channels, and they're empowering their employees. So we're seeing members of the C-level all the way down to middle management, product managers, marketing managers, communications people who are tweeting, engaging on behalf of their companies. So the rise of the social enterprise is taking place in Asia as well, and we think that's extremely fascinating and definitely something to look out for in terms of how Asia is developing its social media usage, and I'm sure it's the same in the rest of the world. And with that, I will hand back over to Dallas, I think, and we'll go into a Q&A. You're welcome.
I thank all my colleagues, and I just wanted to say, and I'll hand over to Paul for questions. We're really grateful for the folks who joined us for this preview today. And, you know, it's really a great thrill for me because we have such an amazing team at Burson, and we don't really get a chance, I think, to brag on our digital folks. But we've got a little over 160 digital strategists worldwide, run by the great people you see on the screen here. Zahir, who's phenomenal and oversees our digital teams in Asia, which is just really not only the most diverse, but also experiencing the explosive growth in India, and Singapore, and Indonesia, and China. And, you know, I'm really proud of the work that we're doing specifically in China, and I would encourage any of our folks on the line who may have questions or want to get some deeper insights into how you can effectively engage social and digital in China or India or any of the markets there, to reach out to us. We'd be happy to kind of sit down and walk you through some of the insights in the specific region. Matthias, who I think is probably one of the coolest guys that work at Burson. For those of you that have not had a chance to work with Matthias and his team, we stole Matthias from the World Economic Forum, where he ran social and digital, basically guiding conversations with the world's most powerful business leaders. So if anybody has questions about whether or not they should be on Twitter or Facebook, Matthias is available to talk you through why it's important to Bill Gates and why it's probably important to us. Sally Carmo, who has really just been a star for us and our team and leads digital in Latin America. I think, you know, one of my favorite statistics about Brazil is that it is the most social country on the planet today. Twitter penetration there is higher than anywhere else in the world based on those who are online. So if you're a company or a brand looking to engage in Latin America, specifically around the major sporting events, the World Cup and others that are coming up in Brazil and the region, we'd be delighted to help talk you through kind of some of the best practices there. And then Michael Basic, we have not had a chance to hear from. He's on the line. I'm sure he'll be available for questions. Michael, who leads our largest digital team here in the United States, is the U.S. practice chair, but also the president and CEO of Proof Integrated Communications, which is a Burson-Marsteller digital agency. Really has a deep expertise in the digital advertising space. You know, we are big believers at Burson that if you're doing advertising in the social space, you leave a lot on the table if you're not directly integrating it with your earned social and digital media efforts. So be delighted to talk you through and help you with all that. But I'd like to thank all my colleagues for joining us and for their great work of their folks. And with that, turn it over to Paul for questions.